Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome as today we dive in and do our week 2 update of the Path of Exile 3.12 Heist League meta overview. For those of you who are new to the community, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future videos just like this one. And if you ever want to find out more about the data and where we're pulling information from, there are links down below in the video description along with timestamps to help guide you through our conversation today. Last week, we took a look at the emerging economy of Heist League and how it is very, very different from some leagues and very, very similar to others. Today, rather than looking at the economy, we're looking at the build meta, what the state of Heist is as players are progressing through their starter builds and eventually picking up their second, third, and fourth build into Heist League. We track all of this data with the help of POE Ninja, and we're going to be looking today at character classes, Ascendancy choices, skill gems, items, and then popular passive nodes. Please note that this isn't representative of 100% of the player base involved in Path of Exile, but rather these are all numbers from POE Ninja, which pulls numbers from the leaderboards on pathofexile.com, which is a limited segment of the population depending on the level of characters that have achieved a specific threshold. That's just a fancy way of saying this is what the top tier or the top XP players are playing in Path of Exile, not necessarily representative of the whole demographic of what everyone in Path of Exile is playing. First up, let's take a look at the character overview in 3.12 Heist League. Numbers in yellow are SC leagues, and numbers in red are HC leagues. Those are the leagues where when you die, your character goes and joins the rest of your stuff in standard. You can see that in both versions of Path of Exile Heist, the Shadow, the Witch, and the Duelist are coming out at relatively high points, whereas the Ranger, the Templar, and the Ascendant are coming out at relatively low points in terms of their popularity. Now, it's no surprise some of these trends. Some character classes are simply closer on the passive tree to certain very strong or preferable passive nodes that are defensive, making them more popular in HC leagues, and other classes are closer to more offensive-oriented nodes and further away from defensive-oriented nodes, making them more popular in SC leagues. Let's take a look at how characters have been used in league starters during the first week to 2 weeks of each of the 3 leagues that have come out in 2020. That's, of course, Delirium League 3.10, Harvest League 3.11, and the current 3.12 Heist League. The 2 most popular characters in SC leagues in Delirium were Shadow and Duelist. In Harvest, that trend continued for the Shadow, remaining in a strong position in SC leagues at 31% and 35% for the Witch taking over in the top spot. In Heist, we see that trend continue, probably mostly due to the fact that patch notes didn't have a significant rework or a significant nerf to any of the Ascendancies. While there were tweaks here and there, those tweaks didn't cause a massive number of players to give up or change from what were tried and true reliable league starters during Harvest. Players for the most part in Heist League still started either Shadow or Witch. Let's take a look at the Ascendancy choices in SC Heist and HC Heist. This is getting a bit more specific than just looking at the character selection. This is now diving into precisely why it is that players are choosing those exact characters to league start with, or to continue and follow up with their league starter with a second or third build. Lines which are blue indicate that there's no change in popularity place. This doesn't mean that the percentage of players playing these particular ascendancies are the same, but rather it means in terms of where it comes in a numbered ordering hierarchy on the list, they remain the same. For Heist League, Gladiator is the only ascendancy that stays in the same spot regardless of HC or SC leagues. Yellow lines mean that a particular ascendancy is more popular in SC than HC. Red lines mean that that particular ascendancy is more popular in HC than in SC leagues. For the most part, these make sense, but there are a couple of these big discrepancies that really stand out. One of those big discrepancies is the Champion Ascendancy. It's massive for damage, and it's got lots and lots of options for defensive layers as well. If you're playing an Impale build, you probably are playing as a Champion, whether you're playing SC or HC. I was quite surprised to see Champion be this low on the totem pole for Ascendancies in SC this particular league. One big shocker in terms of the SC league is just how popular Elementalists are. We'll take a look in a few moments at skill gems, but I think most of this is due to the rise in popularity of Golemancers. I'm not sure who, if anyone, predicted that Golemancers would be a top couple of builds in the league for Heist League, but it's turning out that they really, really are incredibly powerful for almost any encounter that you could choose to have right now in Path of Exile. With the original release of the alert mechanic for Heist, minion-based builds were disfavored for early on, as potentially your minions would aggro and kill monsters inadvertently, and now that that mechanic is gone, it seems like more and more players are willing to embrace things like minions, whether they come in a necromantic form or a golem form. Let's take a look at how ascendancies have changed over the course of the year 2020. During Delirium, for league starting in HC and in SC, the top 3 ascendancies were in HC, Witch, Champion, and Gladiator. In SC, Trickster, Assassin, and Champion again. In Harvest, we had a tie for the first and second spot between Necromancer and Trickster. The third spot in HC was Juggernaut. The third spot in SC was Saboteur. The big outlier here is just how dominant the Necromancer Ascendancy has been over the course of the year. Please don't hear what I'm not saying, especially if you work for Grinding Gear Games. I think the Necromancer is terribly underpowered and could use a lot of buffs. But seriously, it's actually pretty strong and in a great spot right now, and hopefully the team won't notice just how strong and how popular it's been throughout 2020. If you want to play a summoner, if you've never played a summoner, there has never been a better time to start bringing minions along with you on your various excursions throughout Rayglast. Other massive outliers are, of course, the Trickster Ascendancy, which, why wouldn't you want to play a Trickster? If you're not playing a summoner, if you want lots of defensive options and lots of offensive options, the Trickster is there as an overall well-rounded ascendancy. Let's move on to look at how skill gem popularity is developing in the Heist League. Over the first 2 weeks, the most popular 5-link skill has turned out to be Summon Carrion Golem. Now, there's a bit of nuance to be seen here. If you combine Blade Vortex with Vol Blade Vortex, it actually ends up being a higher percentage than Carrion Golems. Simply by looking at the numbers, it's easy to say that Blade Vortex in either the Vol or the basic version, or Golems are the 2 top spots in terms of popularity for the first 2 weeks. Coming in next is, of course, the popular Spectres, which at the moment have been made even more popular due to the emergence of the Syndicate Operative. But don't sleep on Spectres at the moment. I don't think the Syndicate Operative is going to be the endgame version of the best Spectre that we're going to see emerge from Heist. Every day, various players in the minion-based community are trying out different Spectres and trying out different setups, and it's a thrill to be alive as a Spectre player at the moment. Cyclone comes in with 8% of the league starting with it, and of course, it's an incredibly strong mechanic for both main damage source or for utility and proccing things like Cast While Channeling or COC builds. Both Toxic Rain and Essence Drain round out the top couple of main skills that players are choosing to use during the first 2 weeks of Heist. In terms of utility skills, a whole bunch of players are using Second Wind support, and why wouldn't you? If you'd have a skill that you only normally would be able to cast once before it goes on cooldown, and now you get to cast it twice, that's pretty much a duh moment. And I'm not sure if GGG is going to look at this as a good thing or a bad thing. If they look at it as a good thing, then we might see more supports similar to Second Wind in the future. If they look at this percentage and this popularity as a bad thing, we might see a Second Wind nerf coming down the line. The most popular mobility skill at the moment is Flame Dash, with Dash coming in as the second option for mobility, and players, because they're lazy, like to use the Portal Gem rather than Portal Scrolls. 2 things that I was surprised to see missing from this list and not making a top 25 percentile was the new Vitality and Clarity gems. While Precision still makes it into that top percentiles of any skill usages, I've heard lots of good things of players using the new Vitality, especially while leveling. Then again, remember, this is numbers based on players at the top of the ladder. It's not indicative of players across the board. My feeling is that a lot of players who are still leveling through the 10x story campaign, or who are early on into maps, will still be using things like Clarity and Vitality. But as you push further and further into your build, you're going to drop those various recovery mechanisms of mana and life. Let's take a look at the gem meta over the course of 2020. In Delirium, Cyclone came in as the undisputed number 1 skill throughout the first couple of weeks. Stormbrand and Essence Drain both came in at the secondary spot, tied with 8%. During Harvest League, everybody and their brother seemingly was playing either Volatile Dead or Ball Lightning. After that came the classics Raise Spectre, Essence Drain, Toxic Rain, and Cyclone. The massive drop between leagues, between Delirium and Harvest for Cyclone usage, is of course attributed to the nerf that came to Cyclone, making it so that way you were no longer stun immune while cycloning. This made it so Cyclone wasn't just the default go-to skill for any build to become immune to stun. Let's take a look at the popular item setups in 2020. In Delirium, the number one setup was a wand plus a shield. That should make a whole lot of sense, considering how dominant specters, summoners, zombie players were. Coming in at the number 2 spot was a mace and shield, and then in the 3rd and 4th spot, bows and staffs respectively. During Harvest League, the wand and shield combo actually went up in popularity, up to 36%, with then bows and staffs coming in the 2nd and 3rd place at 15 and 14% respectively. Due to the slam rework that came through in Harvest, we also see two-handed axes up there at 6%, which when you compare that with Delirium, was a massive jump from the 1% where they were at during Delirium. In this regard, I think we can say that the hype built up around the slam rework and the two-handed rework that came out in Harvest, at least in terms of player percentages, was somewhat of a success. As we take a look at the popular setup for Heist League, still coming in at the number 1 spot is the wand and shield, but with a significant dip. While Delirium and Harvest saw over 1/3 of the league using that as the setup, nowadays it's less than 1/3 at only 22%. Despite the fact that we've been memeing for over a year now, Bow League, bows seem to be rising in their popularity. Whether this is actually due to true bow-based builds that are using bow skills, or using bows in order to shoot your gem levels through the roof as much as you can, that's yet to be seen. Dual-wielding daggers have gone through the roof, and my expectation of this is mostly due to Golemancer's dual-wielding Cold Iron Point. In Delirium, dual-wielding daggers wasn't a thing, at least for the first couple of weeks. In Harvest, only 3% of the league did it, and now in Heist, we've got 11% of the league dual-wielding daggers. Remember all those nice things that we just had to say about the two-handed rework? Yeah, two-handers are down in popularity again. They're back down to 3%. But that's better than the 1% they were at in Delirium. So again, still a bit of an improvement. Just how long that improvement is going to last, I'm not sure though. Let's take a look at the popular passive nodes in Heist League. The most popular cluster jewel nodes right now are Renewal, coming in at 16% of usage, Vengeful Commander, Rotten Claws, and then First Among Equals. It's no shock that a whole bunch of summoner-based cluster passives would come in near the top spot. Summoners, in addition to being incredibly flexible and being the Swiss Army knife of Path of Exile builds, also have got a lot of passive points that they can simply throw at a cluster jewel in order to get maximum efficiency for each passive point used. There are some minion builds which don't even necessarily interact with the base of passive tree much and simply spend their time getting to the outer reaches of the passive tree in order to start jamming those cluster jewels in as much as possible. Other notable cluster jewel passives are of course damage over time, specifically chaos damage over time, and we can see that's probably attributed to both Toxic Rain and Essence Drain, two wonderful dot-based chaos skills taking on such a prevalent role in the early opening weeks of Heist League. For keystones on the passive tree, we once again see Phase Acro and Acro coming in near the top spots. This shouldn't really shock us considering that pretty much almost every Ranger and every Shadow build are going to be near these defensive options and so would grab them. The same thing can be said for Wind Dancer, although Wind Dancer is a bit far away from a Shadow to grab. Maybe there's a couple of duelists out there using Wind Dancer. Pain Attunement comes in at 13% usage, but expect that number to go up as more and more players accrue more and more wealth throughout the timeline of Heist, and more players swap from basic spellcasting into low-life spellcasting, taking advantage of Pain Attunement. Let's take a look at passive nodes and an overview as they've been changed and used throughout 2020. In Delirium, the top 3 keystones and ascendancies were Elemental Overload, Resolute Technique, and Mind Over Matter. During Harvest League, Acro and Phase Acro both came in at the top spot. Mistress of Sacrifice and Commander of Darkness, of course, both being Necromancer passives, came in at the next couple of spots, and then Call to Arms and Glancing Blows with Elemental Overload, rounding out those top few spots. During Heist League, we see a continuation of some of the trends during Harvest. And again, I think this is mostly due to not much of a shakeup during the patch notes. Patch notes provided some tweaking to the overall passive tree, but no massive nerfs or even real massive additions. The biggest changes, of course, between these two particular leagues are that Wind Dancer has jumped way up on its usage, and Glancing Blows has taken a significant blow itself, dropping down by almost 10% in terms of its usage. One of the funniest things to do is look and see how different mechanics in Path of Exile do not function together, and see how many players are pushing really high-level builds using mechanics that don't necessarily line up. This is a list of 13 characters that have selected to use the Avatar of Fire keystone. Avatar of Fire reads 50% of physical, cold, and lightning damage converted to fire damage. Deal no non-fire damage. That's right, you heard that correctly. This means you only deal fire damage. That means no physical damage, no cold damage, no lightning damage, and no chaos damage. And yet these 13 wonderful people have decided that during Heist League, they would take Avatar of Fire and combine it with the usage of Atziri's Promise, the Amethyst Flask. Atziri's Promise, of course, is most notable that there is a whole bunch of extra chaos damage that you can deal while the flask is in effect. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Bravo, bravo to these 13 heroic, wonderful pillars of the Path of Exile community who have gone out of their way to help remind everybody, don't use Atziri's Promise with Avatar of Fire. Well, thanks so much for joining us for today's discussion where we took an overview approach to the build meta going on in 3.12 Heist League. I would love to hear down below in the comments what your thoughts are. What's standing out to you about what builds are notable, or maybe what build variety is notable in the 3.12 patch cycle. Drop me a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are surprising you about the first 2 weeks of Heist League. And as always, I hope today is the day that a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.